Okay, today's guest on Dad's World is my good friend and certified rad dad, Gary Carrier. Gary and I worked together at a nonprofit about 8 years ago, and from the moment we met, I noticed he possessed something that was wholly unique. A love of world culture that ran deeper than anyone I had met before or have met since. He is definitely an old soul that I've continuously learned from over the years, and I cannot say enough about how proud I am to be his friend. In the last few years, he's co-founded a hiring platform that provides incredible opportunities to people in some of the most underserved areas in the world. Calico Sonder has had the privilege of producing their brand stories. I'll leave a link in the description. The work Gary does is super inspiring in its own right, but like all Dad's World conversations, this one revolved more around how his personal experience has shaped who he is as an entrepreneur, an avid traveler, a lover of philosophy and the hero's journey, and most of all, as a dad to his daughter, Sofia. I loved this conversation, and I hope you do too. If you gained something out of it, be sure to drop a like, a comment, or subscribe to hear more stories from Calico Sonder. With that out of the way, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Dad's World featuring the incomparable Gary Carrier. All right, Gary Carrier.
That's me.
Been sitting in that chair for a little while now. How are you, man?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Good, yeah.
Let's inform viewers of who you are.
Okay.
What you stand for as an individual. Give me the 90-second Gary Carrier pitch.
Sure. So my name is Gary. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington. Spent a long time in the San Francisco Bay Area. Currently live in Las Vegas. Lived in Latin America, many different places kind of in between those. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a proud dad. My most important job. I love being a dad. I am a jiu-jitsu competitor. I also am a big believer in the power of travel, which begets empathy, which ultimately turns into peace, which I think we need a lot more of.
Yeah. So you've always had that call to adventure.
Yeah, I think so.
So you grew up in Seattle, and you grew up on an Indian reservation?
On and off, right?
Yeah.
So my mom lived on the reservation for a while. I always had family members that lived there. The town that I grew up in is, kind of divided by a highway between the reservation and a town called Marysville. And yeah, I spent a lot of time out there and kind of grew up. I'm not Native American myself, but I grew up, very much integrated with the tribe. As I said, family members had married into it. And so I grew up going to longhouse ceremonies, canoe journeys, the salmon ceremonies, all that good stuff. So that was kind of split between, the childhood experience on the reservation, but also I lived on the side of town, Marysville. Big apartment complex, lots of Mexican Americans. If anybody has been to Washington before, they know that, people think of Seattle as the city, of course, but the rest of Washington is pretty heavy with agriculture. And so that draws a lot of migrant families there. And so I grew up around a lot of Hispanic families as well.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that you, in case you viewers want to know, this guy is trilingual. You're one of my very few trilingual friends. You know Spanish.
Correct.
English.
See.
Portuguese.
Yes.
Portuguese.
Yeah.
And you learned Spanish through just like conversationally hanging out with your friends and their families when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting part is growing up in those types of communities. The reservation, and also the apartment complex with the Hispanic families was always a very strong sense of community, very strong sense of family, right? And so, on the streets and stuff, you're going out and you're playing with the friends and the kids in the community, and everything's always, of course, in English. But as soon as you go into those households, the Mexican American households, it's all Spanish, right? Quickly you get invited to what are called the quinceañeras, to the bodas, the weddings, all that stuff. And my desire to learn Spanish was actually born out of really my desire to express gratitude for the way that I was being treated, right? Here, have some more food. Like I would say, Christian, my best friend at that time, Christian, how do I ask your mom for more food? Or how do I tell your uncle thank you? Or how do I,
Right.
It was just born out of this sensation, this desire to express gratitude because of how well I was being treated by those people.
Yeah. And so would you consider yourself fluent in high school?
I mean, fluency is sort of this ambiguous thing, right? I make the comment a lot, like when you learn a language, right? And people in Latin America would ask me all the time about how to learn English and how to get better at English. It's really just a question of progress and evolution, right? We still learn, as native English speakers, we still learn new words in English, right? And so what is complete fluency or domination of a language, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit hard to pin down. So I would say that I was conversationally fluent, sure, in Spanish, but similar to you, I took Spanish as soon as I could in high school. But
did you almost fail out like I did?
No, I didn't. No, although I did not like
where
the teachers.
I fell.
Yeah. No, it's similar to our conversation earlier about the experience really enhances the application of those languages, and so it wasn't really until I moved to Mexico that it really started to pick up, because it was immersion every day. And I always chose when I was living abroad to live with families. Your experiences are more authentic, and you learn things that you otherwise wouldn't learn, not just language application, but like, how to cook certain things if you're interested in that, or, just certain cultural nuances, I would say, are more prevalent or palpable in those types of environments. So living with families was always a way for me to, I got to wake up and go to bed speaking Spanish, or Portuguese. And that helped to accelerate the acquisition of the language.
Yeah. So when did you move to Mexico?
So I came out of Seattle, the University of Washington, in 2008, 2009, right? Which, for those of us that remember, was a pretty tough time to be going into the job market.
What was going on at that time?
Yeah. No, that was the first global economic crisis that we were going through, and as millennials. But
yes, we're battle tested.
But I think people that come out of college are kind of into rough economic environments. They have two choices: either going to graduate school, or a lot of them go and live on mom and dad's basement, or try to make it work in whatever way possible, right? And I just hadn't really found my niche. I hadn't really found my calling yet. And so I just knew that whatever it is that I was interested, whatever that calling was, it was somewhere out in Latin America. And given the job market, and given kind of where I was in life, I decided to buy a one-way ticket in 2009 and moved down to Guadalajara, and got a job teaching English relatively quickly, and just posted up there for about a year before I made my way further south.
Yeah. So you went on essentially like not a vagabond, but you went on an adventure.
You could call it that, sure.
Yeah. So you're bouncing around Latin America.
I did only have a backpack and a passport, so I think
okay. Yeah, you actually told me on the way here like how dire things got. What was it that you said, that you were you had like $2 to your name?
No, not necessarily. I mean,
no, you lied to me then?
No.
Oh, that's right. You had $2 in your pocket.
$2 in my no. I grew up around construction, right? My dad had a concrete flatwork company, kind of the second half of my childhood, and even before that, I did framing and concrete flatwork and roofing, and just kind of was always exposed to that stuff. It was a great way to make money, in summers during the later part of high school and through college, because it's a great hourly wage, right? And at that time, the housing market was booming, so there's lots of work, right? And so I had money saved up. That was sort of my first entrepreneurial venture, I would say, is my dad's company was out following around the larger developers, doing the driveway, patio, sidewalks for all of these developments, and trying to keep up with how fast they were putting up those houses. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that kind of trailing behind him, a lot of the homeowners would move in and want extensions on patios, or want just some sort of different variation to their driveway or something, right? But those larger concrete flatwork companies couldn't pick up on that work because it's not worth it for them. They got to keep up with the demand, So I started a small company to do that, right? To start kind of specializing in additions and modifications.
What was the name of that company?
Gosh, I think I called it G Carrier Construction.
Oh man, that's super original.
Yeah. Original. But yeah, I had saved money through that, and when I decided to move to Latin America, knowing Spanish helped to run that as well. But when I moved to Mexico, I had some of that money in the bank, right? And so I was pretty cognizant that I couldn't spend a whole lot of that money, otherwise it would dwindle away pretty quickly, faster than I wanted to come home. So yeah, I got jobs teaching English, and I worked for Habitat for Humanity and did a couple of other things kind of in my journey through Latin America. But yeah, there were a few moments where this is, like I was telling you, this is pre-Instagram, pre-WhatsApp, smartphones just came out in 2007 for the most part. That was the first iPhone release. And and yeah, there was a few times where I didn't have much cash. I was in the middle of nowhere and out foraging for mangoes and picking up 99-cent crackers as much as I could, you know.
What, if you can take yourself back there, do you remember kind of what the energy was for you at that time? Did it feel exciting? Was there like, what was your stress level like as you're kind of in this uncomfortable, unfamiliar place?
I mean, I think that's the part of the beauty of travel is you are constantly outside of your comfort zone, right? Especially if you're in an environment where you don't speak the language, the culture is not yours, you know, you're international, so you don't have this sort of sense of security and safety that we do, or that you do in your home country. And so it was just sort of constant, you know, constant learning, constant evolution, constant reflection, constant stimulation from all sides, right? You're trying to understand what these people are saying. Okay, I'm picking up on every 2 words, and now I'm understanding 90% of the conversation, and now I'm able to apply. And when you learn language, a lot of what you learn is based on experience. You know, even in our native tongue, it's like if you have a new experience that you're unfamiliar with, you wrestle to find the vocabulary to explain it, right? And so to answer your question directly, the feeling was very much of like, and I say this often, that when you travel, you learn as much about yourself as you do the rest of the world, right? And so you're learning a lot about who you are, right? And I remember, you know, many times just kind of having those conversations with myself of, where do I go? You know, what do I do? What is life about for me, right?
What are some things that you learned about yourself in that season of your life?
To keep going, right? I think, and this has probably been thematic throughout my life is to keep wading through the uncertainty, because there is something out there for you, right? That end goal, that victory, whatever it is that's pulling on you, it's there for a reason, right? And very rarely will it be behind the first couple of doors that you open. It's more going to be behind, you know, the several hundredth door that you've opened, but you can't get to that several hundredth door until you've passed through the first couple. And the first couple can be scary. They can be, you know, uncertain. They can make you want to quit and pack up and go back home. So, you know, learning to persist and continuing to follow a goal and a passion that I didn't really know, I hadn't realized yet, of course, but I just knew that there was something out there and I had to keep going. And that something, you know, ended up being in Brazil, where I eventually made it over the course of a couple of years.
You're bouncing around Mexico, you start to get the hang of it, and you say, you know what? Let's do it again. Let's go to Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, I had made my way all the way through Central America, you know, because we're talking 2010 now, and then lived in Colombia for about a year. And same thing, teaching English. At that time, I was working as a volunteer coordinator for an international kind of like volunteer abroad program. And then, eventually made it down to Brazil. And Brazil really opened my eyes. I mean, Latin America will open your eyes in many different ways. But I often say that Rio de Janeiro, the city itself, is a city of contrast, right? You have these massive slum communities, favelas, some of the biggest in the world, right? The one that I made my way into is 150,000 people. And that's one of over 2,000 just in that one city, right?
Wow.
And so you have these massive slums. But if you've ever seen, you know, a picture of Rio de Janeiro, it's arguably one of the most beautiful cities on the planet, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this constant contrast, right? Extreme contrast between rich and poor, beautiful, ugly, and everything in between.
And it's visual. I mean, it's so apparent
absolutely.
in what you see, because if you've ever seen the landscape of Rio,
right.
I mean, it's like painted on the mountain there. On the hill.
They call it the home to the highest coastal rock structures in the world, right? And so you've got these massive mountains that kind of protrude up out of the coastline, which, you know, normally you see beach, hills, mountains. Of course, there it's different, but it's gorgeous. But to your point, you know, Ipanema and Copacabana and those beach properties that are kind of most people are familiar with, at least by name. Those are some of the most expensive properties in all of Latin America, right? But from them, you can see some of the biggest slums in all of Latin America. Right.
Like it overlooks it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they're on the hillsides, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have a condo overlooking the beach, you're looking at Ipanema here, and then over here is Vidigal, which is one of the biggest slums.
An interesting allegory. I don't know if I'm using that word right. Kind of what you see is like it's what you choose to see, right? If you choose to look out and see that, you're going to see that. If you choose to look just slightly to the left, you're going to see what you see there.
Yeah.
What did you discover in Brazil that you carried with you into your professional career?
Great question. I think when we say social impact or philanthropy work, or, I think those are nice feel-good things, that we participate in. And it feels good to go out and do good in the world, of course. I had always been involved in stuff like that. I think my grandparents kind of put me onto it. They were very well respected in their communities, were always people who were lending a helping hand. And they actually managed the apartment complex that I referred to earlier. And so, they were the managers, the repair people, the chauffeurs, the babysitters for some of the kids. They just were always there for people. And so that kind of instilled in me the spirit of giving back and of service. And then, of course, growing up in those communities that I mentioned earlier, community, family oriented. So when I got down to the favela in Brazil, right, there was an opportunity for me to live with a family, which I always chose to do, as I said, but also work as the head English instructor for this NGO, for this nonprofit organization that was operating in the favela that had been funded by a couple of American guys for 20 years or so. So I took that job, and I was also teaching at the local university English. It was just on the other side of the hill. And I chose to live in that favela there, and was only going to be there for a couple of months, because by that time that bank account had dwindled down quite a bit. And so picking up those jobs allowed me to extend that more. But also I just fell in love with, it's easy to fall in love with Brazil. If you've ever been there, it's, the people are warm, very nice, it's beautiful, and it's relatively cheap, So I fell in love with Brazil, I fell in love with Rio, but I really fell in love with that community. It was something that, I think that we progressively have missed, I think, in the United States. And what I mean by that is this sensation of community, of knowing your neighbors, of, having these connections with people outside of your immediate family, right? And I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 9/11 and anthrax scare. And when I was growing up, my parents would send me over, my mom would send me over to the neighbors to ask for sugar or ask for milk, right? And I feel like post 9/11, somebody knocks on your door and people get freaked out.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that just kind of permeated throughout much of our culture. But I say this a lot, human beings need food, water, and each other, right? We can't exist without any one of those three, right?
That connection, yeah.
That connection, yeah. I mean, they say one of the worst things that you can do to somebody for punishment is solitary confinement, right? So living in that favela was very much an eye-opener in terms of, wow, these people are, this community lives and breathes as one organism, right? It gets scared together, it laughs together, it celebrates together, it fears together, it gets sad together. And I noticed that, my walks down to the beach would get longer every time I would go, right? It would take 15 minutes to get down there the first time, and then 30 minutes, and then 40. Why? Because I knew more people. I knew the person at the bread shop. I knew the lady at the sandwich place. I knew the bakery guy, so you'd stop and chat and talk to people. And I feel like we really underestimate how important that is, human connection.
Yeah.
So I was working there, in the favela, and I just wasn't an English teacher. I helped to start a Muay Thai kickboxing club and did a few other things, was involved in other projects there. But, this is 3.5 years later after I had left Seattle, and realized, like, okay, what are you going to do? Like, what's your move? Right. This is it's not a long-term thing. You can't just vagabond in Latin America for the rest of the world. And if you truly want to dedicate yourself to service and to help, you need to think strategically about how you are going to make a life doing that, right? Yeah. So I was always very interested in sort of the intersect between business and impact, right? And now what I call, technology and social impact. I think that there's a way to build really exciting services and products in the world that at the same time, benefit the world either from an environmental or a social standpoint. I think Tom's shoes is probably the most common example of that. But I think it's important to consider those sort of a third way, right? And so to answer your question, I said, okay, I need to leave. I need to get out of just helping this one community, and I need to leverage the fact that, just by being born in the United States, when you travel, especially when you live in these places, you realize how lucky you really are, right? You're lucky to be born here in the United States. You're lucky to be healthy. And so that comes with, I think a tremendous amount of, I wouldn't say obligation, but I would say opportunity for you to explore different pathways. And so my pathway was very much, okay, how do I continue to do what I love, which is, give back, service, but also how do I blend that with the opportunities that I'm given in the United States, right? Both educationally and access to resources. I had always wanted to start my own thing, right? I had always had sort of an entrepreneurial spirit. I mentioned the concrete thing, but even when I was in Mexico, I started an e-commerce company online selling acai products because acai was starting to get more popular at that time. But I just was always... I was never fully confident in myself to go off and start a real company, because I was like, well, I don't have an MBA, I need to check that box. I got my language experiences now, so that box checks, but now I need to get X amount of professional experience. I know I need to go and work for a big four. I need to, So it's like this endless list of boxes that needed to be checked in order to satisfy, which ultimately was just self-doubt.
Yeah.
I think the quicker that you can get over that and recognize that you're going to learn through that process and learn through that journey, and that's ultimately going to be a better teacher than any of those other boxes that are waiting to be checked, the quicker you can absorb those learnings and that knowledge and that wisdom and then apply it to whatever it is that you're doing. So I finally ventured out and started a company, and that was a few years ago. So I'm happy and very satisfied with the direction that it's going.
All right. So tell me about what you do now day to day.
Okay, so now what we do is essentially connect U.S. companies who are looking for technologists or technology talent to software developers, to quality assurance specialists, to people in the technology field that are based in Latin America. And so it helps U.S. companies with cost effectiveness. It helps to expand their engineering teams as much as they need to for sort of the determined amount of time. And behind that, we're able to go into those favela communities, go into slum communities and offer IT training and education to people who, historically haven't had much opportunity, but there's no shortage of talent in those places or potential. I mean, that's evenly distributed. And so we're able to sort of help those people launch a career in technology and kind of point to these guys that are now getting job opportunities internationally as mentors and as people that can help to show them the way. So it's both sort of servicing the needs of the market, but at the same time generating positive impact for people, like I said, that traditionally haven't had it.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll put the URL right here. Let's see. Ding. Great. Plataforma and Plataforma Impact. Check it out. And if you get a chance, watch their videos because I may or may not have had something to do with them, with something in my eye. I would love to hear your thoughts on hustle culture. And you touched on it a little while ago, like checking all these boxes, making sure you hit all this stuff, falling into that like rat race type of mentality. What are your thoughts on hustle culture?
Yeah, I think, going back to your question about what I learned when I was traveling, what the feeling was, that feeling of self-care and self-reflection is important, of course. And I think a lot of us, we go into a job or a career field or a university or we're so eager to get going that we've never had those conversations with ourselves, right? And so we often end up living somebody else's dream, whether that's your parents or whether that's society's dream or expectation of what you should be doing. And so I think it's really important to have those conversations with yourself, to be aligned, in all aspects of life of this is the direction that I'm going. Because the hustle culture is real. It is important to work hard and to hustle and to grind and all of that, but make sure you're doing it so that you are the end benefactor, you and your family, right? Otherwise, like I said, you end up building somebody else's dream. And so I balance, and it's tough. I try to balance the self-care and the time off and time with family with busting my butt and making sure that I'm the hardest working person at the company. Nobody should be working as hard because you own the company, right? So it's a balance, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that you cannot do your best work when your battery's half full, right? You have to take time to recharge the battery so that you can come back with full force, so that you can perform at your top, right? At the top level. And so the only way to recharge the battery is to step back, step back, relax, take time off, do whatever it is that fills your cup, and then come back. It's an interesting generational thing. I think our parents and the people that came before them, it's the Dust Bowl generation. These are people that knew what it was like to not have anything, right, or have everything taken away from you, and hustle, grind. And you see that reflected even in a lot of blue collar work is, you get scoffed at if you want to take vacation sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Or you get, I know I've talked to people in the past that pride themselves on never missing a day of work, right?
Exactly. I felt that a lot in construction, and Boeing, which is the biggest employer where I grew up. It's very much like that. People would retire from Boeing and then keep coming back to work because they didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. Or in the case of what I've seen, people that work until they're 85 and, basically get forced out because it's all they've ever known.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's important to hustle. It's important to work hard, of course, but it's also important to take care of yourself so that you can do the best work when you are hustling.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. What was it like growing up in your home?
Thanks for asking the question. I think as you get older, you have more empathy for your parents because there's a time where you transition from, child-parent relationship to more kind of a peer-to-peer relationship, right? And you start to see, and you have a lot more empathy for their shortcomings or the things that frustrated you when you were younger. Now, your parents love you and they do the best that they can, but you also have to understand that a lot of people, if you're not cognizant of it, end up repeating cycles of things that happened to them when they were younger. Given the situation that I think my mom had come from, I was given a lot of love because it was sort of the inverse of what had happened to her. Right, growing up, and being given a lot of love can also have the effect that not having love, which is complete abandonment, but there's also on this end of the spectrum, the extreme is smothering, right,
Sure.
and needing to and feel like you need to get away, and the whole difficulty with the leaving the nest and all of that. So it was tough, it was tough because for most of my childhood, I had a very loving relationship with my mom. It was when my parents got divorced when I was about 17 that things really started to hit a rough patch because, I mentioned that my dad had the concrete company. And so 2008 comes and everything goes away. Right. And so kind of at the edge of being able to retire, having built something, he gets the rug ripped out from under him, both economically. And then, my mom ends up leaving. It created a pretty difficult situation for everybody involved, myself included. And so, it kind of pushed me away for a long time. And that was, part of the reason why I felt so at home abroad, was because I did need to get away. But, for the most part, my parents have always loved me very much. I've never had a shortage of love, and always encouragement. And so the sort of baseline or core elements in terms of a childhood were there. It just was trying to understand why certain decisions were made and why they did things, which you only can understand, once you're older and you're become a parent yourself.
Yeah. I often say one of the most meaningful moments of my life was when I felt like I had fully processed the fact that my parents are just human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're just doing the best they can, given the moment that they have, all the circumstances that are involved. The quicker you can realize that, especially as you transition into parenthood, I think I think the more opportunity it is to enrich your relationships with your parents if you have the opportunity to do so. Yeah,
absolutely. And, to be very proud of them. My mom did the best that she could. My dad did the best that he could. The dad that raised me is not my biological dad. I never got to meet him. But, my dad, who I call my dad, raised me from the time I was about 2 years old. A lot of my personality comes from him. He taught me how to navigate, different social circles, and he kind of instilled in me the entrepreneurial spirit. My mom was very hardworking as well. She's a 3-time national champion in artistic roller skating in the Roller Skating Hall of Fame. So hard work and determination and falling hard and getting back up time and time again. From the time I was very little, she had skates on me, and I was always in athletics. And these were people who had not gone to college. They didn't know how to guide me there. But up until that point, I think they instilled in me a lot of the core qualities that helped me to go beyond.
Yeah. What was it like growing up with world champion artistic roller skater?
I admire my mom very much. A 3-time world champion is a heavy feat,
Yeah, a lot to live up to.
It's a lot. Well, yeah, it's a lot to live up to. But I remember, when she had skates on me, when I was about 3 years old, she had me doing these routines that I looked back on and thought they were ridiculous. And so I said, no, I want to be a speed skater, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to be an artistic roller. I want to be a speed skater. So I got those inlines on because, speed skating was the class after artistic roller skating, the one that my mom caught.
And I mean, come on, it's the mid-90s. It's like
mid-90s, exactly.
Prime rollerblading territory.
Exactly. But I wasn't a fruit booter. I wasn't to go to the skate park.
Is that what they called it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. A fruit booter?
Fruit booter. Yeah.
Fruit booting.
Yeah. So, no, I speed skated.
I wonder if that's a derogatory term.
Probably is.
Yeah.
Probably cut that.
Maybe we'll cut that.
Yeah. No, growing up with a world champion in the house was good because she always pushed me hard, she would put me into very uncomfortable positions, as a speed skater. You're going to compete here, you're going to do this. And then when I went off to do other sports, she was always there, always at my games. I had to tell her not to come to the practices sometimes because she'd be the only one there standing in an umbrella, but she was always my biggest fan.
Was she vocal with the coaches?
No.
Oh,
she,
good.
Being a coach herself, she knew.
Yeah.
She knew that only to step in when absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you let that coach and student relationship develop as it should. But yeah, being involved in athletics, I eventually stopped speed skating and did boxing for a while, but basketball, baseball, all that. But ended up sticking with wrestling and American football, which I did all the way through high school.
This guy was quarterback of his high school team, so pretty big deal.
Yeah,
pretty big deal. What's the high school name?
Marysville Pilchuck Tomahawks.
Oh,
yeah.
I love it.
The Tomahawks.
The Tomahawks.
Tomahawks.
We were the Indians.
Really?
McEachern Indians.
Okay.
Shout out MHS class of 06. I was the mascot too.
You were?
I was the mascot. That was my...
Did you have your long hair then?
Yeah, I did actually.
Okay.
Yeah, not this long, but
Okay.
I had a shag at that time.
Cool.
Junior and senior year. Put
Cool.
that Indian head on. It was a mask that I put on, like a big old head. But anyways, so at some point you transition and become a father. You are the type of dad with Sofia. Is it okay if I say your name?
Yeah.
You're the type of dad with Sofia that I hope that I am with Maisie when she's older.
Thank you. That's a very nice thing to say.
You're a good follow on social media. Follow him. We'll put the name here. Ding. You really peel back that curtain to show what fatherhood looks like, especially as a single dad and as someone who is so passionate about travel.
Yeah.
You've started to instill that in her now that she's 11?
Yeah, she's 11 now.
Yeah.
She's
So what were the first 11 years like in fatherhood?
I mean, it's tough, it's tough to transition, but the beautiful thing about becoming a parent, and I think most parents will relate to this, is the fact that before your children are born, you are naturally the most important person in your life. Nobody comes before you, right? And that's how you've always been treated, hopefully, by your parents, right? When they're born, you naturally step back into second place without even knowing this little thing.
Yeah, you don't even try.
Right. But that's a very healthy experience for the human being to undergo, right? Because you recognize that this whole thing is much bigger than you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a really beautiful experience to move from first to second place and to really dedicate yourself to somebody that you don't even know. It's embarking on a new journey, of course, but it's if you do it right, and by doing it right, what I mean is love and consistency. It's not difficult, show up for them, love them, right? And you will be rewarded with great wisdom and great lessons that will then be applicable to other parts of your life, right? Yeah. And so that's sort of the approach that I have always taken to fatherhood, is like, okay, this is coming, this is happening. And I better get ready for it. And I'm all in. I'm 100% in. There was never any doubt in my mind about the fact that I needed to show up and be a great father because, I'm the father to a little girl. And when you have a little girl, there's this other element of, that little girl will look to you as her father as, examples of all men that come after her in her life, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think about that now, is the way that you, of course, talk to her, the way that even when you get into the inevitable arguments, how do you navigate those arguments? How do you, I open the door for her. Like I think about how I want the eventual partner in her life to treat her, and I need to be reflective of that, right? Yeah. So that that's the baseline.
Yeah, that's what she goes
Absolutely.
for, and that's what she sees. It's, that's what's comfortable in her life. It's comforting because I think that's I've experienced aspects of life with people who didn't have a great father figure, and it's hard to recognize when there are just like good men or good women in the world, just good people in the world. If you've been slighted, especially by a parent, I think that, I don't think it's like a controversial statement to say that building relationships is more difficult in that scenario because, like you said, that North Star isn't quite there. My dad didn't have a great relationship with his dad. And so as we were younger, these 3 boys, my dad had to learn how to relate with them, because he didn't have a North Star to kind of figure out what it was like. So, it all plays into itself,
It does. And I think it goes back to the comment about self-reflection too. If you didn't have a good relationship with your parents, it doesn't mean that you cannot have a good relationship with your children.
Right.
But you also need to be cognizant of, and that's not just for people who didn't have a good relationship there. It's for everybody of where are my core wounds, right? What are the things that trigger me? How does my behavior being seen by this little person, right? What are my vices, right? Just being very self-aware of these things because there is, extension of you observing you, right?
Yeah.
And that will inevitably adopt behaviors. And so you have to be very, very careful about not repeating certain cycles or not repeating certain behaviors that you didn't like to see when you were growing up, right? And so I think that takes a lot of care and reflection and then application of those things, which is ultimately some of the most difficult parts.
Yeah. I'm sure it's hard to answer this question. And I won't put it into terms of Barbara Walters interview. What have been some of your highlighted chapters with Sofia when you think about her upbringing? She's still very young, but I have a 2-year-old, and I feel like I have a whole mountain of chapters already. So what are some of your highlights?
I was going to say, like watching you with your little girl, it reminds me of those moments, where they're still so small and they're learning expression, right? And so to watch them express love in all of the ways that they can, right? Watching her be clingy to you, when they're babies, they kind of like gnaw on your cheek, I think the evolution of the expression of love is really, really beautiful, because now she shows me love in different ways, right? Which is beautiful, but
she's not clinging to your
no.
Good night, Dad.
But to just kind of live in those moments, right, and appreciate those moments because they go by quick. I look at you with yours, and I'm like, dang, I remember those days. And to just really, really sort of appreciate and live in those moments, right, of the way that they're expressing love, and then being proud of her accomplishments. It doesn't matter how small or big they are. I've told her from an early age that, I want her to explore many different things, all of her interests, sports, music, dance, all of this stuff. But there's sort of 2 non-negotiables for me as a father, right? The non-negotiables are music. You have to be involved in music in some way. It doesn't matter if it's choir or piano or whatever, because, that's the language of the universe, right? It can open doors for you in so many different angles, right? And then the second is self-defense. Right. So she comes to jiu-jitsu with me. She competes in jiu-jitsu, and there's so many beautiful life lessons to be learned on the jiu-jitsu match, the tatamis, right? Watching her work through struggles, right? She was lamenting one time, like, I don't like this, Dad. I'm getting my butt kicked, I'm getting my butt kicked. These kids are better than me. This one's bigger. And I remember I sat her down one time and I said, honey, everybody on this mat that has a colored belt has lost more than they've won. That's a prerequisite to get those colored belts, is to go out and get your butt kicked. The only difference is that those people kept coming back when the majority of people left and didn't come back, right? And that translates into other areas of your life because, the reason that I got into jiu-jitsu was because of my wrestling background, right? Having been a high school wrestler, I didn't know much about jiu-jitsu. I'd come across it in Brazil and and actually was given my first kimono by a friend of mine in Brazil. But I didn't get involved in jiu-jitsu until I had come back to the United States. And it came as a result of a friend of mine who had called me back up to Washington to referee high school wrestling for a season. Said, hey, you want to make some extra cash? I had just come from Latin America, bank account's low. I said, yeah, of course. Yeah. I said, yeah, of course. And but it was the very first time that I had watched a wrestling match from the perspective of the referee and not the wrestler. I had always been the wrestler, right? And now being a bit older and in that environment, if you've been to a high school wrestling match, it's big in Washington. And so there's a spotlight and, two young men show up in front of everybody that they know and love, and they're wearing a goofy leotard. Yeah. And I just remember thinking like, wow, it just takes a lot of courage just to show up in that outfit in front of everybody that you know and love.
Your junk just hanging out,
right? Let alone you're going to go up against, somebody who's also tough from the other town and
also wearing a leotard.
So the
confidence is there.
There's a chance that you could get some of that junk, dangling in, So I remember watching that and thinking, dang, I admire these kids just for showing up to do this, right? And then as a wrestler, right, you can either win by points or you can win by pinning your opponent's shoulders to the mat, in which both of your shoulder blades have to touch the mat for about 2 seconds, right, at the same time. And then you call a pin as a referee. And I remember, watching that space between the shoulder and the mat when somebody would get thrown to their back, worse even when it's at the beginning of the round, because now you've got 2 minutes to fight, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember watching that space between the shoulder and the mat and seeing it open and close. And you can watch when it closes and doesn't open anymore because the person has quit. They don't want anymore. They're done. Makes it easy for you to call the pin. It's over, right? But conversely, you can watch when somebody, even though they're getting their butt kicked, even though they've got another minute to fight from their back, they're not going to give up. It's like a fish out of water, right? And I remember thinking, damn, I'm watching essentially character under construction here, right? Because that's building character.
Yeah.
Because so many times life will try to do that to you. Life will try to throw you to your back, right? And what are you going to do in those moments? You're going to let your shoulder down. You're going to give up. You have to fight. You have to get up and make up the difference, right? You have to win. You have to keep going. And so that's kind of what inspired me to start my jiu-jitsu journey. And it's been a beautiful process to watch my daughter go into it as well, because those same lessons, right? Those same pushing your body past, when your mind's telling you to quit, you can't go anymore, keep going, and inevitably the type of people that you meet in those gyms, right? You'll meet quality people because those mats don't leave much room for ego. You come in, you're a tough guy, you think you're going to smash on people and you get your butt kicked by somebody who's 60, 80 pounds less than you. You're not going to come back.
It's all finesse.
Yeah, exactly.
So what does she do musically?
Piano. Yeah. So she plays piano. She's in choir now too. She's got a beautiful voice. She plays piano quite well. She's got the fingers for it.
Yeah.
And so we kind of grew up where I kind of have raised her in a musical household. When we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, we would have, jam sessions weekly. I still play music in the house. I've got a pretty large appetite and repertoire of different music genres. So she's exposed to many different types of music, and yeah, she plays piano and likes it.
Yeah. And she travels with you sometimes?
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah.
Now it's easier for her to travel, but we just got back from a trip. We went on a 10-day trip to Japan. Every year I try to do what I call a 3 generations trip, because my dad still lives in Seattle. We live in Las Vegas. So they don't get to see each other too much. But whether it's going camping or whether it's going abroad, we try to do something at least once a year that's memorable so that they can share those experiences together. And a couple of years ago, I asked my little girl, I said, where would you like to go on the next big 3 generations trip? And without hesitancy, because, I was thinking she's going to say Disneyland or Disney World or something, right? She says, Tokyo. I said, Tokyo, Japan? Yeah, that's the only Tokyo you want. I said, okay, you want to go to Japan? She said, yeah. This unfortunately was kind of when the pandemic was hitting, so we had to wait a couple of years, but we finally did it. We finally realized kind of a dream a few years in the making, and my dad and my little girl, we all went to Japan for 10 days and had the most amazing time.
Yeah. What were some of the things that caught your eye when watching Sofia in that environment?
I was so excited. It was like a proud dad moment when she said, Tokyo, because I had been there before, and I knew you go to that part of the world. If you stay in Latin America, it's still Western Hemisphere, even Europe, right? It feels very culturally similar. But you go to the East and, nothing is recognizable. Everything is very different, right? And so it requires you to step even farther outside of your comfort zone. And I was so excited for her to do that, right? Because Japan is beautiful. It's a very clean country. It's very safe. The people are very, very nice, but it is very different, right? You can't read the characters. The language is very difficult. The cultural nuance, all of that stuff is very different. And so there's a beautiful quote that says, I think it's by Mark Twain originally, that says, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness." You cannot travel widely and be those things, right? And so I was excited for her to go and have this experience, not just because stepping outside of your comfort zone requires you to be vulnerable. That vulnerability instills in you more self-confidence, and also the recognition that most people in the world are good. And also because the more that she travels, the more that she sees the world. If somebody in her class or in her life says, "Oh, all Japanese people are like this," she can say, "No, I've been there," in the same way that she can say that about Brazilians or Mexicans or some of the other places that we've gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I was not a well-traveled person when I was a kid. And I wonder how much that would have dictated some of the decisions I made, in my teenage years. Like, we were talking earlier that I essentially slept through Spanish class, when I was younger, because it was tough, and I didn't have the resolve to understand how important it would be, not just in anyone's life to learn another language, but for me specifically to learn Spanish would have been very advantageous of me. And I wonder if I had gone to Mexico sooner, if I would have understood, the cultural importance of seeing the world, not just from seeing it, but from experiencing it, from living it for the period of time that you're there.
We lived in Brazil for all of 2022. When I was kind of getting my company started, the impact piece of it, I needed to put the right people in place and kind of set up the operations in Brazil. So we actually moved to Rio for about a year. And so living there, going to school there, she speaks fluent Portuguese. She feels more Brazilian now, and she went to a good school there, and she got a good education for 4th grade. But, on the weekends, because the school was private and, some of the most upper class people in the city, send their kids there, she would be, at her friend's house at the top level condominium overlooking the beach. And the next day she would be in the favela with me. And so it was always very important for me to show her spectrum, right? And to give her perspective, and not just from sort of a cultural standpoint to take her to Brazil so she can live in a different country, adopt a new language, but also I think from a socioeconomic standpoint, right? So to show her culture, but then to show her how people live in different places, because, you made the comment earlier about people living in Ipanema and having those two different views, beach and favela over here. I think some of the most prejudiced people in Brazil are those who live in those neighborhoods because they're petrified of the favelas and the people that live there. There's a lot of, negative media. There's a lot that goes into it, but, stereotypes and prejudice about people who live in favelas versus people who live on what they call the asphalt, the concrete, is really sad. And it actually helps to, a negative continuation of income inequality and lack of opportunity for those people. So it was very important for me that she sees both sides, right, of Brazil, both this way and then internationally as well.
And also knowing that it's not something that she can necessarily act on immediately, but that experience will, again, dictate, future decisions in her life. How often do you operate in terms of serving your future self or thinking about Sofia's future self?
Excellent question. I love the question.
Thanks.
I think about it as, the tip of the spear, I would say, is for me to continue to pursue the things that light me on fire, the things that my soul yearns for, right? My passion, right? To live out a dream that I have, because that is the best way to teach her to do the same, right? I can't tell her to go out and follow your dream, to go out and, pursue whatever it is that calls your heart's interest if I haven't done that myself. And also, I think, you hear this sometimes in parenthood where, oh, after I had a kid, I wasn't able to pursue the things that I was interested in anymore, right? And I think that's very unhealthy, because that consciously or subconsciously can instill regret, right? On both sides, both the parent side and also the child side. And I think that the best thing that you can do is continue to pursue those things, even though the velocity in which you're going to get there has changed. I remember thinking about this when she was born. I was like, okay, I was running towards a dream, and now I'm going to be running on the beach. It's going to be a little bit harder, right? But I'm still running. I'm still going to the same destination. It may take a little bit longer, right? But through that process, I get to show her what it's like, and all of the struggles and the difficulties that I'm going to have to endure in order to get there, right? That's going to be the best inspiration for her, so that I can say, hey, remember when I was going through this, and how did I get through that, and the challenges, so that I can relate to her and also use that sort of as fodder for inspiration.
Yeah. It turns a challenge into a motivator,
Yeah, absolutely.
because parenthood is challenging. You're talking about another human being. So there's a lot that comes into the equation there, logistically, financially, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of those things. I think there's a beautiful part of not knowing, right, and having to kind of figure it out on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't imagine how much more challenging that would be in a foreign place, or under a situation like yourself, where you're going after all of these things, and you're in this entrepreneurial world. You're doing things very unorthodoxly, and then you bring a child into that equation. Do you remember what running on the beach felt like when you first started doing it?
Yeah, I mean, extremely difficult.
Yeah.
There's no other way to describe it. I just had made the decision not only to be the best father that I absolutely could, but I had made the decision not to stop pursuing my dream, right? And I knew that Plataforma was going to be something. I didn't know what it was going to be. Most things don't end up turning out how you originally envisioned anyway, right? But as you sort of chisel away, right, at the rock, it ends up becoming the beautiful sculpture that maybe you had not envisioned before. So I just knew that I wasn't going to quit, right, on either side. I'm not going to quit being a great dad, and I'm not going to quit pursuing my dream. I owe that to myself. And I owe that to her as well, as an inspiration, as an example, as a father.
Yeah, and it requires you to look at those priorities and know that you can't split off and be two different people.
Right.
But you want to give equal amount of effort towards both of these things, right? Yeah. Being a great parent and being the best entrepreneur or social impact individual that you can be. So going through this stage of really wanting to turn it all off at 5 p.m., and feeling like that's my guardrail that should be impenetrable, because the second that things start to penetrate, and it's not like it's 5 o'clock on the dot. It's not like I'm Fred Flintstone going down the dinosaur tail. But I want to give myself that guardrail to turn off this part of myself and to turn on this part of myself, because Maisie deserves that, and I think that's the long and short of what it takes to be really pursuing something while being, in the pursuit of being a great parent, is knowing how to separate those two things within your life, and then where they converge. Because like you said, you brought Sofia with you when you went to Brazil. That's a merging of the lines between your career self and your parent self. But it's a fun challenge, for sure, but it takes time.
No, it's a good point too, because, I spoke about the wisdom and the sort of lessons that you learn, in that process. And I think what you're alluding to is like, it's time management and self-discipline, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever time you decide that this is time for her, to be fully present, because it's not just a professional thing; it's a personal thing as well. We have our smartphones in our pocket that are calling our attention 24/7, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's important to have the self-discipline to not look at those smartphones, right, while you're with your children. Not only because, as you said, she deserves it, but also because they're going to model behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you want them to interact at the dinner table? How do you want them to interact when family is over, right? And so if they see you as a parent checking out all the time, scrolling, mindlessly, they're going to mimic the same behavior.
Gives them license to do the same thing,
Exactly.
Because I've noticed that too. If I see someone on their phone, it's it's okay for people to be on their phone.
And as she gets older, one of the things that you'll hear a lot is, well, you do it, Well,
I'm sure those are very fun words to hear.
But it's hard to argue against.
Yeah.
Because it's some superfluous argument about, well, I'm the adult, or, I know what's best for me,
Mm-hmm.
So, just be aware that well, you do it, that's coming, and it will come way more than once.
Oh, man. All right. I've got a couple more questions for you. I want to get this on camera. How many countries have you been to?
I've been to 28 countries the last time I checked.
28. How many states have you been to?
I believe around 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you hit every continent other than Antarctica?
I've never been to Australia.
I got a one-up on you. I've been to Australia.
Yeah, I've never been to Australia, and of course, never been to Antarctica.
Yeah.
The others I have been to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a goal for you to try to hit all 7? There's 7, right? I don't know.
I don't even know who this one's by, but there's a quote that I cite often too about travel that says, "The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page." In terms of travel, I try to go to the places instead of checking boxes or, Instagram photos. It's more about what naturally interests me. I think about, what's funny is I think about this often, of how we live on such a beautiful planet, right? As an oasis floating in the middle of darkness, right? What if when you die, you go back to wherever it is that we came from, somewhere, right, in the galaxy or the universe, and you're with a group of other sojourners or souls, and they say, "Where did you get your last life on?" And you say, "I was on Earth." And everybody's like, "You got to go to Earth? What did you show up as?" "I was a human." "You got to be a human being on Earth. Lucky you. What did you do?" So I want to have a good answer, right? I want to have a good answer to those questions. It's such a beautiful planet. There's so many things to see, and I just want to make sure that I take full advantage, right? And as you say, squeeze the lemon as much as you can, because life is short and the world is wide, and I just want to see as much as possible.
Put that on a shirt.
We talked about this before, but I was listening to talk about entrepreneurship. Jeff Bezos.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's quite popular. Recently, I heard Jeff Bezos say something along the lines of, most of the regrets that we have in life end up being acts of omission, paths not taken, things that we didn't do, right? And if you've studied sort of the blue zones or Ikigai and these concepts around vitality, it's true. A lot of the things that people regret end up being things that they didn't do, that they were called to do, or that they felt they should have done, right? Mm. But it wasn't the right time, or, I didn't have whatever resource in order to make it happen. It ends up turning to a regret, and life goes fast. And, the body that you're in right now, you're going to be envious of in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? If you're lucky enough to make it there. So why not now, right? Get over the self-doubt, get over the preconceptions of what it's going to be like, and go and do it.
Yeah. Walk through life like you're that 80-year-old man who woke up one day and is in his 36-year-old body.
Yeah,
what
exactly.
would he do? How would he see the world?
Exactly.
Okay, last question for you. Let's fast forward. It's 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. Sofia happens to stumble upon this video, this conversation. If you could say anything to that person, what would you say?
Shit, man. Hold on. You just threw a huge question at me. Give me a few seconds to think
Nope.
about this.
You got to go right now. We got to go. No, it's fine. Take some time. Think about it.
I think the thing that I would convey is sort of pent up in some wisdom that I've acquired along the years. And part of it is, there's an Einstein, old quote that says, "The ship is safest in the harbor, but that is not what ships were built for." Right. And another one that I love, that I keep with me very close, is Pablo Picasso's "The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And so, in those words, I think you can unpack a tremendous amount of wisdom, right? And that, we were lucky to be born at the time that we were born, in the bodies that we were born, in the places that we were born, right? And what are you going to do with those gifts, right? Because they are gifts, they're opportunities. And to go out and to face uncertainty and to face risk and to embrace the fact that you will fall down and you will need to get up and continue to go to find what that gift is, right? What is your gift, right? And then once you do find that, how do you propagate it? How do you help more people? How do you make this place better than when you got here by way of finding that gift, right? I think there's a lot of wisdom in understanding that if we all had the opportunity to do that, I think we'd live in a much different place. And the other thing that I would say is that recognize the ripple effect of your existence, right? We talked about Plataforma, we talked about my upbringing, we talked about my mom, we talked about world championships. We didn't touch on my grandmother. And that's a tough one for me because she was very, very close to me. And she was a tough lady, probably the toughest woman I've ever met in my life. Born in pretty dire conditions, right? Dirt floors, abusive household in every way that you can imagine. Had 4 kids by the time she was 18 years old, and didn't have much of a choice in how she was going to live. Alcoholic father, and yeah, she was illiterate. She didn't go past grade school and past the second grade rather, and ended up having her children taken away from her because of the conditions that she was living in. Didn't really understand what she was signing. Had been put in a hospital. By the time she got out, she was only able to get my mother back, who was the oldest of the children. The others had been put into adoption, and gave my mom the best life that she could, right? Given what she had gone through, right? It's going back to the empathy for your parents, right? And understanding where they come from. My grandmother worked her tail off, right? Just to provide stability for my mom to be able to pay for those artistic roller skating lessons. They couldn't afford ice skating lessons. We know some of the top names in artistic roller skating or artistic figure skating from ice because of the Olympics, but, roller doesn't have that sort of notoriety. But roller is more difficult because the boots are heavier. You don't just have a blade. You have 4 wheels. You have a truck, right? And so they do the same moves, but it's more difficult because the boots are heavier, right? Wow. And so my mom ended up becoming the 3-time world champion, Hall of Fame. And I was the first person in my family to go to college. So my mom was able to give me a better life than what she had. She didn't experience a whole lot of love in the household. So she kind of overcompensated, gave a lot for me, right? But definitely a lot of love and a lot of assurance, right? And so the thing that I would pass on to my little girl is that you are the product of the strength of your great grandmother, right? The smile I see in my little girl's face, right? The safety and the security I understand is a ripple effect of the cycle of poverty that my grandmother had the strength to break, right? And so recognize that you are standing on the shoulders of other people, right, that came before you, and also recognize that you are now building on top of those shoulders for the next person to stand on yours, right? This life is much bigger than just us. What is your legacy going to be? How are people going to remember you, right? And ultimately, what is the meaning of your life? So that's probably what I would say.
That's amazing. I don't think I could. I think we could end it in any better way. You're a great dad.
Yeah, thank you,
Sofia. You got a great dad. Remember that. Don't ever forget it. Love you, dude.
Love you. Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thanks for being
for
on.
having me.
Yeah. Let's cut. We're gonna cut here, folks. All right. Thanks. Hopefully, someone gets something out of this. I don't know.